We hear some words from Scripture as we begin tonight. For whoever does the will of my Father, Jesus says, is my brother and sister and mother. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and obey His commandments. And that's the beginning of our crossroads for tonight. Crossroads that we all encounter in our lives. Sometimes we might move along easily from day to day, enjoying our lives, feeling at peace. But then it always seems to come our way. The crossroad, a place where we must make a choice. And it's there we stand frozen, wondering which way we should go. Do we go right, left, straight, backwards? And what weights down each of those choices? Which way does our heart say we should go? Which way makes sense? And which is God's way? None of these answers are easy, and a crossroad can bring us incredible spiritual pain. It can even bring us to our knees in indecision. It can bring us to destruction. And so tonight we conclude with an expert on the crossroad of obedience. He was there in the garden with Jesus when Jesus himself faced the crossroad of obedience, when Jesus confronted his part in God's plan of salvation. And so we welcome the disciple, John, who is often called the disciple Jesus loved. Welcome, John. Can you tell us a little bit about that night in the garden when you saw Jesus and actually what you learned from Jesus?
I'm almost embarrassed to be here. Yes, I was in the garden with Jesus, but I certainly didn't understand what was going on, and I certainly was no help to him there.
Did you see him praying?
Yes, he went away to pray, and he asked us to pray with him. I could tell he was struggling, but after the meal, after the glasses of wine with the Passover meal, after walking to the garden in the dark, I couldn't keep my eyes open. I admit, I fell asleep.
Didn't you understand, though, the terror Jesus was facing?
Not really, not then. It was not unusual for us to go off as a group and Jesus to pray. It happened often. Jesus was busy at prayer many times as we traveled with him. I just didn't know what was going on there in the garden.
Do you understand now?
Now, certainly. I wish I could go back to the garden and do it over. I wish I could join Jesus in his prayer, in his struggle. I know that it would be different now. Jesus was facing the most difficult crossroad in his life. He was staring at the reality of the suffering he would have to endure facing the cross, and most terribly, doing it alone.
Was it really different from the other times he had to choose between his own way and God's way? Was his choice to obey in spite of the pain so unusual?
Not really. We know that Jesus was often tempted in his life to step away from God's plan for him, God's plan for us. Satan harassed him like he had done in the wilderness with a way out, a way to avoid the suffering. Just bow down and worship me, Satan said, and I will give all this to you. He was offered a shortcut that avoided the cross, but Jesus sent him away and clung to the path that God had set for him.
So what does Jesus' choice to obey, in spite of the terror that faced him, mean to you now?
It inspires me. It convicts me. It must do the same for you.
How do you mean?
I'm certainly not unique. I faced a crossroad like Jesus many times in my life, not with the weight of the world on my shoulders, but with my own heart in conflict over which way to go. I faced the crossroads every time I came to the place where I heard the voice say to me, "Look, what will happen if you choose to obey God's claim to your life? You will be hurt, will be persecuted. Every time I stood at the crossroad, I remembered Jesus in the garden and asked him to stay awake with me and watch with me and pray for me.
Did that happen often?
In those years after Jesus ascended, all of us who followed him were faced with the choice to follow him or to deny him. If we denied him, we could escape the threat, the persecution, even the death that faced us. We were outcast, rejected by many of our brothers, and threatened often with suffering or death. I asked God's help to remain faithful and encouraged others to do the same in my book called Revelation. I wrote, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days face tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life."
But we aren't persecuted, so we don't face that kind of crossroad, do we?
You know, you face the crossroad of obedience every time you confront a choice that asks, will you follow your way, the way of the world, the way that others push you, the way that will be easiest or most pleasant for you, or will you follow the way of Jesus, who would lead you on the path of obedience?
And those kinds of choices happen every day.
And that's why we need the power and presence of God's Spirit every day. That's what Jesus was doing there in the garden and on the cross. He was bringing forgiveness and new life to you there. By God's power and the sacrifice of Jesus, you begin each day new and forgiven, new and able to make the choice of obedience.
And how can we make those right choices?
Here's another thing I wrote in my gospel. Abide in me, and I in you, is what Jesus said. The same Jesus who struggled there in the garden, the one who went to the cross, the one who rose, is there in our hearts with us at our crossroads and in our choices.
Well, thank you, John, for those words, those encouraging words. And we will remember with you and rejoice with you for what Jesus has done and what he will do in us and through us. Thank you very much, John, for joining us. And, you know, reflecting on that really occurs to me that this fits very well with the journey we've been on our weekends with the 10 Commandments that we just concluded, because we've kind of been taking this look at how God asks us to obey his commands. And as we look at the crossroads of obedience here tonight, we hear how we are new and forgiven each and every day because of Jesus' sacrifice, because Jesus chose to go through all the things that we've been covering over this Lenten journey as well. And so we are made new and fresh and forgiven each day to, again, follow the commands of our God, all 10 of them, all the other things in Scripture, and be his obedient children.